Well, welcome back to Red Hot Talk once again. And I know we've been away for a couple of weeks, and so we're very happy and excited to be back here and talking to you guys. I know that some of you have been asking, where is Rod and Jimmy in my chat box? And so here we are. We're going to talk a little bit about Michael 4/3 today. So hopefully you can get excited about today's discussion and maybe perhaps participate in joining in by leaving some of your comment as well. As you may have seen, my title is gonna be a little bit an enthusiastic discussions today. Let's put it that way. I wouldn't say heated. And I just want to hear from maybe Rod your opinion, your thoughts about Michael 4/3, and obviously I'm going to share my view. And of course, we would like to hear yours as well. So any of you want to talk about your feelings to photography, in particular Michael 4/3 platform, what you think about the past, present, and also the future as well. And I have a set of notes in front of me because I just want to be a little bit more structured today. For a start. Never done this before, and so hopefully I will be able to get a little bit more organized in today's discussion. So let's talk a little about just in general. And the latest news that I have received is obviously the market share about Michael 4/3 as a platform is less than 5% overall. So this is a massive shrink from let's say 5 to 6, 7 years ago. Obviously, there's a lot of factors to it, but let's go through bit by bit today. Rod, Michael 4/3 is kind of like, I would say, the pioneer platform for mirrorless technology. They were one of the first platform to promote purely 100% mirrorless, removing the mirror box from SLR, basically starting from ground up. And literally they owned the market back then when they first started. So when you first encountered Michael 4/3, what was your first feeling of it? What was if you remember, that's about 12, 13 years ago now.
I'm trying to think. First of all, apologies if I'm represented on your screens by about 5 pixels. I seem to be having some bandwidth issues. So you might consider that a good thing, but hopefully you can still hear me.
We hear you fine,
my
Rod.
first encounter. Okay, my first encounters with Micro 4/3 were right in the early days. Anyone remember is it the E300? It's not Micro 4/3, Ben.
That's the 4/3, right? Yep.
Yeah. So that was one weird camera. So I think some of the early 4/3 experiments were quite odd, but still quite exciting.
Yeah.
But yes, I've been involved with Micro 4/3 pretty much since the start, and 4/3 before that. So I guess I've seen its progress from the very beginnings right to the present day.
But then the E300 was a SLR. It's not quite mirrorless technology, right? It's still more like a traditional SLR. Have a mirror box. It's just the sensor size is a bit smaller.
What's the one with the sideways mirror?
Right.
Can you remember the one I mean?
No.
I might have to Google it. I've probably got the name wrong. I'll look it up. But it wasn't a traditional DSLR shape. Early 4/3 cameras. It was. Do you know, maybe the internet won't go back far enough.
It's been archived.
4/3. 4/3. Here we go. Yeah. I don't think it's even now. I do know, of course, the E500, the E400, those. The E30.
Right.
Is that the one? No, it's not. It's so those.
So it was an Olympus camera, right?
Cameras appear. They've been wiped from history. I can't believe it. How peculiar. Hang on. E330. There's the fellow.
Right.
Unusual internal configuration. Not exactly a DSLR style. Still optical viewing, but I've got a feeling, Poro type mirror, like a binocular.
Okay.
So I think the mirror went sideways in some strange way. But anyway, yes. So the bottom line is, I've been following 4/3 right from when dinosaurs ruled the earth, basically.
So, Joe, from your, I mean, I think a lot of people who's been with the Micro Four Thirds platform long enough would remember the early days of Micro Four Thirds cameras weren't exactly fast to shoot with, and you know, comparatively to then the dominant, the DSLR technologies, because, you know, all the SLRs were using face detection technologies. They're much faster for continuous focusing and also point to point as well.
I guess it depends on whether you're comparing 4/3 with DSLRs or Micro Four Thirds.
Micro Four Thirds in particular.
So Micro Four Thirds, I mean, it's early days, so mirrorless was still having to prove itself and catch up to a degree. But even then, if you look at cameras like the Pen EP1, I think that was a design that just, and a quality of design that just didn't exist until that point. So that was the first of the retro cameras, you might say.
If you remember, I mean, I have to ask you as a reviewer, and how many stars out of 5 did you rate it on?
Do you know, I can't remember. I can't remember if I did actually review it and where I did, who I reviewed it for, because this was probably for a magazine, one of Future Publishing's magazines, and it may not have made it onto the website as a review. I don't remember. I probably gave it 4 or 4.5, somewhere around there.
Wow, they're high.
But I think, you've got to remember the times and the competition it was up against. It wasn't the best sensor in the world. No. And the focusing wasn't that quick. But it was a camera of a size and a style that nobody else made. And it's very endearing. And I think with it, I had the retracting 14-42, not the pancake one, but the older one. And there's the was it the 14 f2.8 or was it 17 f2.8?
Yes,
which was
the one that people are saying is a lens that cursed the Olympus.
I don't know. I don't know why people hated it so much. The fact is, you only had a 12 megapixel sensor back then, so I wouldn't have thought its failings were very obvious. I thought it was all right, but
I don't know. People might have a time.
Nobody made prime lenses then. You know, so Olympus was ahead of the curve.
That is actually very true.
Who'd ever heard of a pancake lens? Who'd ever imagined a camera that you could put a lens on and still put it in your coat pocket?
That's a very good point, though.
Crazy kind of idea was that.
I think that's a very good point about prime lenses, because before that, you know, zoom was literally dominating the whole market. Everyone's making zoom lenses there, and you know, whether it's going to be the Pro Zoom 2.8 trios, or you know, or the f4 trios, or simply the kit 3.5 to 5.6, that sort of kit zoom lenses. You're right. You know, Olympus did make a huge, a bunch of zoom prime lenses. So did Panasonic. So that was the time, I think, maybe they thought that, you know, the system sensor. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the sensor ability for shooting higher ISO settings were pretty limited, and also the contrast detect AF, you needed a little bit of light to actually work, you know, correctly. And having a prime lens, having a little bit brighter aperture, has definitely helped the system in multiple fronts. So I guess that's probably one of the reasons, and the other reasons, obviously, because both Panasonic and Olympus at the time really pride themselves on having a smaller system. Even today, still the same case. So having smaller prime lenses will really showcase, you know, the complete opposite to then the SLR equivalent.
And a lot of those SLR lenses, they weren't all that good. You know, you might complain about some of the Panasonic lenses, but you've got to remember this. When do you think this was, Jimmy? The EP1, 2010, something like that, or a bit earlier?
I think so. 2000 and maybe even a bit earlier than that. Maybe 2008, 2009. I think it's pretty long ago.
We can't judge a camera from then by today's standards. You have to judge it against what it was up against at the time.
Yep.
and it wasn't all that great. if we're to be fair.
Only if you look back now. But
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
remember Kai from back then when he was still reviewing for Digital Ref, and he really liked the EP1, and so did Locke, and they both loved the camera because of the styling. Like you said, the build quality was nothing like it. It was full metal housing. It just, all the buttons and dials very tactile. They didn't even talk too much about the autofocus performance at the time. They just really loved using it. Simple as that. And as a camera, I would say, even though it may not compete with today's technologies in terms of focusing speed, but seriously, if you pick one up today, even though it's 12 megapixel, if you're just casually walking around snapping it, it's still a great camera.
Yeah, I think so. And I think as well that we tend to, things like autofocus, the arrival of video as a mainstream feature has made any autofocus failings more obvious. And there's no shortage of people on the internet who will tell you why this camera is rubbish or that camera is rubbish. And very often they're complaining about a kind of performance that you don't actually care about or need, but it kind of filters down, doesn't it? You think this camera's rubbish at subject tracking.
Yep.
In a 4K 60, therefore its autofocus system is rubbish. It's a silly assumption, but people do make these assumptions. They do. We've got into the habit of looking for weakness, not strength. But I still think going back, I think you would have said back then even that the focusing wasn't as quick as a DSLR. But then you would also say that on mirrorless cameras, it never is. So I don't think the EP1 was worse than what was around at the time. And of course, as we know,
and I guess also in the early days of mirrorless technologies, and especially like from the Michael Four Thirds platform, they really aiming for the lifestyle photographers, less so about the professionals, sports journalists who are using huge lenses. Well, in fact, they didn't really have any big long lenses to start with. Most of them were, wide angle or the standard zoom range, kind of between the equivalent of 24 to 70 kind of range. A couple of prime lenses, I know Panasonic had the 20 millimeters 1.7, so it's equivalent of 40 millimeters. So these are relatively standard focal lengths. It's nothing very specific. They really just having just normal, for normal people, day-to-day shoots kind of thing. And no niche, nothing. And that, I think, that kind of target audience really starting to eat up into actually people starting to buy into the system with both Panasonic and also Olympus. But I think that the real big event came when Olympus started with the EM5. I think that really kickstarted the whole kind of, not just about retro styling, but whole mirrorless attention. The people were really getting into the EM5, buying loads of EM5s, and then Lumix subsequently offered the GX3 and the GX4, which is really like a video beast, and the GX4 was the first one who can shoot 4K videos in that mirrorless market. And that really kind of jump-started the whole kind of mirrorless revolutions, so to speak. And of course, and then back then, if you look at like the likes of Sony and Canon and Nikon, they're still pretty much DSLRs, right? And none of them were still into the mirrorless market yet. So in terms of market share, I would say between Panasonic and Olympus, they literally 100%. I know Blackmagic already had the Michael Four Thirds cine camera, but the proportionally, obviously, it's very minor. They probably got about 2 or 3% of it.
Well, it's a very specialist camera too. And it's only for a certain kind of filmmaking. It's not a vlogging camera, that's for sure. So I think though that one of the problems for our home system today is the same problem that Olympus had back then.
Yeah.
That they were fighting against an audience that wasn't really particularly interested in style and innovation. All they were interested in was test charts resolution measurements and cost. And if you reduce cameras to that, then Micro Four Thirds is always going to come off worse, because you'll always be able to say this sensor's better, that autofocus is better, etc., etc. I think this has been a problem for the Micro Four Thirds format all along. That it's been. I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now. I think it's been fighting the wrong battles.
Oh,
it's trying to compete with mainstream cameras. When it's a unique proposition, and that's never going to work.
In some way, I think, you can kind of put the similarity between Leica and the rest of the world. Like it's still a camera, but it's a very different type of camera altogether.
I think Leica has mastered the whole marketing game. I have a lot of respect for Leica cameras. They are beautifully made. But I think what Leica has done is very clever. If they charge £7,500 for a camera, people are ready to be impressed. If it was half the price, they would just dismiss it. And say, this costs as much as a Sony A7R5, and it hasn't got as many buttons. It's rubbish. But
or
because
not as many,
costs twice as much.
Or not as many megapixels.
But the price lent it an aura.
It's interesting. We're going to come back to this point, I think, maybe later on when we look at how Michael Four Third can improve for the future audience. But let's continue with what I would say the big events in the Michael Four Third timeline. So we talk a little bit about the EM5, and obviously in terms of professional photographers' point of view, the EM1, the original EM1, was another big release for the Michael Four Third platform. The reason I say that is because EM1 was the very first mirrorless camera sensor that has face detection technology, even though it was still very limited in terms of coverage, because it's only, I think, the center 5 or 15 points that has the face detection cells in the sensor, not the entire sensor that we are used to date. So it's kind of like almost like shooting like the old SLRs. If you want face detection, you're like kind of limited to a certain number of AF points.
There's your frame. And there's your AF points.
That's pretty much it. The reason they did that is because Olympus wanted to lure a lot of the original 4/3 SLR users to use some of their older SLR lenses in the mirrorless bodies. So remember those converters, the MMF converters. So basically these converting 4/3 lenses into Michael 4/3. They work brilliantly. I still have a couple of these original 4/3 lenses with those MMF converters. So use it on my, all my Olympus cameras, which is totally fine. It's pretty fast as well. So what I'm trying to say is that the EM1 really changed the game when it comes to the perception as a professional photographer. I didn't even notice the EM1, to be quite honest, not until the Mark II came out. And then I started to look back into the Mark I and did a little bit more research on it, because the Mark II is what literally got me into Michael Four Third, the platform. And eventually, probably many of you already know that I bought into the system, I converted and got myself a whole bunch of Michael Four Third stuff because of the EM1 Mark II. And even this very channel that you're watching now, 99.9% of the videos were filmed with the EM1 Mark II when we first started for the first 5 to 6 years. And it's a brilliant camera. I think even today I could still happily use it if I wanted to. So I think the EM1 Mark I and Mark II was really significant when it comes to converting people's perceptions and ideas about Michael Four Third, or what Michael Four Third can achieve. I know Panasonic is, on the other hand, didn't quite get the same attention from photographers' point of view until much later stage. But Panasonic also has some quirks as well, because I know that we have the Pen F, which is the rangefinder, probably the only rangefinder style camera in Olympus lineup, even up until this point. But Panasonic did have some rangefinder style camera. They have the EVF on one side of it. I think it's a GX series, and they're quite popular. And they have this tiltable EVF as well, which is like, to a lot of photographers, they like to use maybe top-down shooting, more waist-level shooting. They really enjoy that shooting experience, and that also give a lot of people who like to shoot like a traditional rangefinder or maybe even TLR style, where you're looking top down, an option to shoot. At the time, there was no other alternatives from either big boys like Canon, Nikon, and Sony. None of them offer these sort of cameras. I know now we can say that Sony has a kind of like, again, very much a rangefinder style camera bodies, and but it's still not the same as Panasonic when they have the tiltable EVF, which I think is actually pretty cool still. So Panasonic, and between Panasonic and Olympus, they really did some great stuff. I would say between the early 2012, 13, all the way up to 2018, I would say. This is kind of like the prime golden era of Michael Four Third, when things were going well. They have really good bodies coming out. They have started the platform starting to mature. Lots of new lenses coming, big zoom lenses, pro grade lenses, all the 1.2 Pro lenses that you see and love, they're all coming out around about that time. And that's another thing I want to bring up today is third parties. During that time, the Michael Four Third has gathered a lot of attention, and a lot of Chinese manufacturers in particular, they really starting to get into the lens making industry by starting producing lenses. So to be able to make something that works with a camera body, obviously, they're all patents and license and things like that. It's not quite straightforward. So for them to start up at a relatively low cost, they looked at Michael Four Third, and it was a fairly big platform, and there are lots of users out there. And also producing lenses, because of what it is relatively cheaper compared to bigger formats. So a lot of them joined the Michael Four Third Alliance. So the platform was really heating up, really starting to expand. Lots of members in there. You can see like Lauer, the likes of Lauer, TT Artisan, 7 Artisan, Zhongyi Optics. All of these companies were joining the Michael Four Third Alliance, starting to produce a lot of Michael Four Third lenses. And of course, most of them started off with, manual lenses. So my point is coming to basically a full circle now. During that time when everything was expanding, lots and lots of Chinese lens company making Michael Four Third lenses. We have absolute tons of them now. But in the last 2 to 3 years, we don't see many, right? I'm pretty sure a lot of you agree. We don't see Lauer releasing any more Michael Four Third lenses. We don't see TT Artisan, 7 Artisan release any Michael Four Third lenses. They have APS-C lenses that can be adapted to Michael Four Thirds, but they're not dedicated Michael Four Third lenses. So you don't have these brilliant ultra wide angle lenses from Lauer anymore. Like we had the brilliant 6mm, 7.5mm, 9mm, these all brilliant ultra wide lenses. And now they're moving on to bigger format, like the autofocus, full frame lenses. All of them are. So do you think, Rod, is this like a trend, or do you think it's just simply a matter of a company moving forward, looking at profitability? I think that's one thing. And also looking at the market in general, we will probably sell more full frame lenses than Michael Four Third lenses.
I think it is a trend, but I want to just rewind just a little bit to the points you were making about the EM1 Mark 1 and 2. I had and used a Mark 1 for a very long time. Very good camera, 16 megapixels, not 20, but you hardly notice the difference. But I think what your point is that this really moved the game forwards. I'm not so sure, because I think this invited a comparison that Olympus was always going to lose. They were trying to make a grown-up camera, grown-up professional camera, to compete with other grown-up professional cameras of that style. And I think they were always going to lose because of the sensor size.
Right.
So I think that if if you want a biggish camera and you don't mind carrying around big f2.8 zooms, it's not the right format, in my opinion, because there are others now which are seeing more active development than probably are. But if you want a compact travel camera, a camera with style, a retro camera, a portable camera, this is where the Micro Four Thirds format excels. But they gave up on that battle when I think they'd won it, and moved into a battle I don't think they can win.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'll come back to that point about the retro side of it, the travel lifestyle camera category. And it's almost like what you reinforced the point you made earlier about they're competing with the general markets that is dominating and also mastered by the larger formats. And like the Canon and Nikon, they've been in the pro arena for so many years now. Pros will only know two of them, although I have to give credit to Sony. They break into the market and now become another big player, perhaps even bigger than Nikon in many cases. So I think it's interesting you brought it up, and you're quite right, sir, saying that the big cameras, because Olympus did make the EM1X, which is the biggest Micro Four Thirds cameras to date, and no one else breaks the record in sort of the biggest Micro Four Thirds cameras. And although I rave about that camera, I love that camera, but as you pointed out, for people who are willing to have a big body like this, and potentially using bigger lenses, and in terms of image quality and outright speed, you probably can't quite match the bigger system. And
I can demonstrate it visually what I mean. This is my own one. You can see the size of that.
Yep.
This is my Sony A7. I've moved back a bit. It's actually smaller than my own one.
Yeah.
I've got my EOS R8, which is about the same size as the own one, but lighter. I know the lens size varies. That's a different point. Yeah. But I think the issue is that if you're just coming into photography, you can get a Sony A7 IV for about the same price as an O1 Mark II, and that's a 30 megapixel full frame camera. You can get the EOS R8, no IBIS sadly, but let's change that. Let's make it the EOS R6 Mark II. It's about £2,000, $2,000, about the same as an O1, but it's got autofocus and video capabilities that are a step up again. So I think whatever you and I might feel about the strengths of the Micro Four Thirds format, cameras like the OM1 and OM1 Mark II are going up against cameras that are cheaper, as good or better, with bigger sensors.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's come back to this a little bit. I understand, and I also appreciate. I think we all agree that physics, that's definitely part of the whole sensor size things. Dynamic range and noise performance and so forth. But Olympus and also Panasonic to extent is they always argue, you're not looking at just the camera, but also as a system as a whole. The equivalence of the reach and angle of view, whatever, like things that they always talk about every time they launch a new lens or a new camera. And do you believe their argument still the case? And, when you look at a Micro Four Thirds as a system, regardless of the body size, because we talked about this many times before that as well. The camera can't be too small because you can't hold it properly. So that's the fact. To be able to hold it properly and comfortably for a long time, you need a certain size. The grid has to be a certain size, and you can't get away with that. Yes, we love small body. Who don't? When we come to travel and things like that. But those are travel cameras. They're not something for people who like to hold bigger, heavier lenses setup, or to hold the camera for extensive use, so like 3-4 hours at a time. For something like this, you do want something that's quite comfortable to hold.
I agree. I agree entirely. I think the three cameras I mentioned have
Yeah,
bodies all very much the same size. The Sony A7 is a little too small, but the bodies are all about the same size. I agree completely. Cameras have to be a certain size to be manageable. The lenses are another point because the smaller format has
yeah,
broadly smaller lenses and
yeah,
they're cheaper. So that
yeah,
if you want a professional MFT system based around an O1, say,
yeah,
it's going to be a lot less expensive than doing it for a full frame camera, and the
yeah,
lenses are going to be lighter and smaller too.
yeah.
That is certainly true. But I think what we're talking about here is how the world perceives this.
Yeah.
And this is the issue, I think, for OM system,
Yep.
that for the same money, you can get a camera with a sensor 4 times the size, more resolution, and at
Yep.
least as many lenses. They might not be as good or as cheap, but
Yep.
there are at least as many. And you'll be surrounded by people who tell you you should only buy full frame. So that's what OM system is up against, really.
Yeah. I mean,
So this is what I meant earlier about. I think they fought the wrong battles.
I don't disagree with you to that extent. And it's always going to be a hard sell, especially when now everybody have a level playing field. When I say that is that, remember we talked about earlier when Panasonic and Olympus were dominating the mirrorless markets because no one else made mirrorless cameras. They're all DSLRs back then. And also, even when they started making mirrorless cameras, the Micro Four Third bodies were still better in many fronts. But first of all, we had IBIS, and the early days of mirrorless cameras didn't have IBIS from the full frame side. And even when they did have IBIS, it's still never as stable as any Micro Four Third system, even to date. You can do side by side tests. Anyone would tell you that Micro Four Third IBIS is way stronger than anything else on the market, including APS-C cameras. And so it is actually very interesting to see how the landscape has shifted and changed. But now people are looking more than just the IBIS. They're looking at autofocus performance. They're looking at resolutions. They're looking at a dynamic range, even though whether they understand this or not, whether they can make use of those features or not. That's another issue. But when it comes to buying decisions, it's a simple box ticking, right?
And
Unfortunately.
And it's always based around the camera. If OM system ever decided to approach, I was explaining to Jimmy before we started, my very expensive Rode headphones are falling to pieces.
It's your dog. It's your dog.
Very much like me. No, the dog didn't do it. For once, the dog's not responsible. But no, I think if OM system wanted a different approach, it could start with the lenses and not focus on the cameras. So, for example, I know you have, Jimmy, and I have had the 8-25 f4.
Yes.
There is no full frame lens that does that.
No.
There's also the OM system 12-100.
Yeah.
Nobody else has ever made a professional zoom lens with that range and that optical performance.
Yes.
There aren't any. And in my drawer, I've got I know you've got the 40-150 2.8. I've got the 40-150 f4. There is not in the full frame world an 80-300 millimeter equivalent constant aperture f4 that small.
Yes.
Well, there isn't one at all. But if there was, it wouldn't be that small and it wouldn't be that cheap or that good. So maybe OM systems should be leading with the lenses, not the cameras.
Well, I've always said that there's still a lot of room in the lens lineup, from both Panasonic and OM system. Yes, we have a lot of lenses, but if you look into the actual lens lineup, there are still a lot of gaps in between that can be exploited. And even some of the early Micro Four Third lenses are in desperate needs of updating. So
I think think I would say, sorry to interrupt you, Jimmy. I think if I don't, I'll forget what I was going to say, and that'll be
Yep, go on.
but I was just going to say that I don't think what the system needs is fast primes, because that's another battle the format's not going to win. You're never going to get the same background separation with micro four thirds that you would with full frame. It can't be done. So I would say make small primes, because nobody else will be able to match that. That's where the micro four thirds advantage lies. Those small primes you're talking about. Yes, please. Can we update those?
Well, we had two already from older system, right? The 17 and the 25. But yes, definitely. If you look at both Panasonic and OM system, we do need some updates in the lens development side of it. Many of them are as old as the system itself, so it just needed some sort of updates, whether to bring it weather seal or optical improvements, or we just need something. Okay, so go on then, Rod. You're going to say something?
No. All I would say about that was it'd be nice if they could. This is going to sound strange. We wouldn't have said this a few years ago. If they could make them feel as metallic and robust as Chinese lenses, like Laowa lenses, that would help. Well, the 17 f1.8, that's a nice lens.
Yeah.
The 12 f2 is nicely made. Yeah. The others, plasticky, cheap, but plasticky.
Yes, and but I think they're changing that though. Remember the 25? It was plastic, but the new 25 is metal.
Is it? Oh, okay.
It's metal. Yes. They also increased the price. They also increased the price by £100.
Well, yeah.
But then, what can you ask for? A fully weather sealed metal body. I think £100 cheap. In terms of the upgrades.
Yeah. So this is what I mean. I just think Olympus and an own system, and to a degree Panasonic, they've just been picking the wrong battles. Is it I Ching, The Art of War? I don't remember very much on that book, mostly because I've hardly read it. But there's a saying: fight the enemy where he isn't.
Yeah. I remember someone did say something to me about the Michael Four Third should be living in the small pond instead of swimming into the ocean and trying to compete with the rest.
Well, in some ways, but I think that was meant that sounds like it's meant in a somewhat derogatory fashion. I think it can do things that the camera formats can't.
Yeah.
But it's kind of moved away from that, right, when the world is moving towards it. But I think they've chosen a path, and that's it. I don't suppose Panasonic is terribly committed to Lumix G anymore. But even here, I think people have missed some rather obvious things. Like, for example, you've got the GH7.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that will do 4K 30, 4K 60, full
4K
width
120.
video.
Yep.
Will it do full 4K 120 full width?
It does 4K 120. Yep.
So you take that for granted, whatever. But then you move up to Lumix S, and you can't get that.
No, it's crop when you do 60.
Or if you go across to Sony, you have to get something like the A7S3 or the ZV E1 and pay a great deal of money for a camera which is with a sense of very compromised for stills photography to get the same effect. In fact, I imagine, I'm not sure they can do 4K 120 without cropping it. I'm not sure about Sony. But this is my point. The GH7, all people talk about is, it's Micro Four Thirds. But this is a camera that can shoot at those frame rates full width in 4K like it was every day.
Absolutely. You know what? And I have so many times tell some of the my colleagues, industry colleagues who do a lot of video making, commercial video making, and they're all small companies, of course, and they're all starting up, and they always ask me, well, what sort of system should I buy into? I mean, like, I always say to them, look into the Micro Four Third, because the initial financial outlay is much lower compared to bigger format, and you don't get the same thing. You don't get the same thing. Depending on your type of video you're making, the GX7 can do literally everything you're asking for. Whether it's going to be running gun, whether it's going to be put on a gimbal, whether it's going to be continuous shooting for a long time, because of the sensor side, it tends to it doesn't overheat as much as the bigger format, and it does open gate. If you want slightly higher resolution, it does 5.7K. So it does a lot of stuff that is still relevant, well, more than relevant than today's needs, to be quite honest. So I think for future proofing, if you want to use the camera for the next 2 to 3 years, once your business develops and make a lot of money, then you can maybe look into more expensive and high-end system. But to start with, I think you can't go wrong with the GX7.
I don't think you can, but I think Panasonic would rather people order Lumix S.
Yeah.
I think that's a decision this company has made, but the Lumix S cameras are not as capable.
No.
I don't think the hardware can do what the GH7 hardware can do.
No.
And that again is the advantage of the format.
It's a weird thing, like when you said that Lumix or Panasonic was almost but given up the G series. It kind of interesting to hear that, because when you look at the launch of the GX7, it was quite subdued, quite low key. Compared to, let's say, the S9 last year, which is the big, massive party throwing, kind of invitation everywhere, global launch, and it's a very opposite thing compared to the launch of the GX7.
Well, and the S9 isn't that great, like the S5. I mean, they're great in some respects, but the 4K 60 is cropped. They don't do 4K 120. The Panasonic's list of formats and settings is so long I can't remember it, but I'm pretty sure that the cameras are nowhere near as capable once you drill down into these different combinations of bit depth, subsampling, and all the rest of it. But it is weird. I think Panasonic probably would rather everyone bought into Lumix S, but they'll keep on making Lumix G stuff until somebody tells them to stop. but right. This is the very great shame. You've got cameras like the GH7, which are pretty extraordinary.
It is.
Get overlooked just because they're Micro Four Thirds.
Well, I mean, if let me ask the audience now, and what is your favorite Micro Four Third camera? Let's say top 3 cameras. I want to see your list. So for me, I think that because I've been using Micro Four Third for such a long time now, I think my all-time list is going to be, at the moment, it's GX7, the OM3, and also the EM1 Mark II. I think when it comes to significance in my career so far, it's these 3 cameras that I think are that shouts to me the most. I know that you might ask me, oh, why not the OM1? Why not the Pen F? They are great cameras too, don't get me wrong. They're all very, very good camera. I also have the G9 Mark II. This is also a great camera. But to me, that what makes me feel the happiest when I come to shooting professionally are those cameras that I just mentioned. So, in terms of feature-wise, they're all very equivalent. You can say, one would lose one box there, one box here, but they're all very much the same. They all have hybrid AF. They all have strong IBIS. They all pretty much shoot the same things and have same recognition subjects, AF things like that. Obviously, Olympus, another trump card for them will be the computational side of it. So that's why I chose the OM3 over the OM1, because it has basically the same computational features, it just in a slightly more flatter, more compact, and also better looking body.
Well, yeah, I think the computational side is interesting. I'd be more impressed if it's easier to get to. This is one of the biggest drawbacks for me. That it's a big selling point.
Yeah.
And having a button for it on the OM3.
Yeah.
You think, well, how is it taken so long? I think it should be on. Well, no, seriously, because
Yeah,
if you're on the
yeah.
OM1, you've got to know where to look, and you've got to have the time to press some buttons and
Yes.
bring it up and choose the settings. It
Yes.
should be on the main mode dial if it's that good, and I think it probably is. It should be on the mode dial. It shouldn't be in the menus.
That's really what puzzled me. But that brings to my next point that I want to talk about, or to talk to all of you and see what you think about it. So I have written down here about Michael Forther's development, and also a general comment from me. I want to hear your thoughts as well, Rod, and also the audience, is that are both Panasonic and Olympus at the time, now I'm not talking about Olympus system at the moment, but were they thinking a little bit too far ahead, or they were just a little bit too behind? So when I say that, it's because Olympus has some quirky cameras that make sense today, but didn't back then. You know,
I'm convinced they saw the future but gave up too soon.
We talked a little bit about that, right?
I'm not even joking. I think that's what happened. If you could still buy a pen like those diddy little EP 7s, 8s, and 9s.
Yeah.
Ideally in denim or chocolate or green or purple or whatever color you want.
Yeah.
You could sell them today. And I think what's changed is that 5 years ago, we were all very worried about megapixels. We thought, we've got to have more, we've got to have more, we've got to have more.
Yeah.
I think today we figured out everything we do is either published online or shared socially or shared digitally. So, for example, with I use my own one as my work camera.
Yeah.
Only 20 megapixels. How does that work? Well, the reason it works is everything I publish tends to be reproduced at 4K absolute maximum, but more likely 2560 by 1410, which is the biggest I can do on my own website. Yeah. And most of the people I write for, their largest size is probably closer to 1920 by 1080.
Yeah.
I'm downsampling images from a 20 megapixel camera. Yeah. So I don't sell prints. If I sold prints, I might have a different opinion.
Yeah.
But my work is all digital. It's not about megapixels. It probably never was.
No.
And 12 megapixels, marginal. 20, not marginal.
No. Because 4K is 8 megapixel, right? So it's more than double when you have 20.
Thing is as well, I don't know how many people now have a 4K monitor. But the 4K monitor, I would always tell people get a 4K or a 5K monitor for an Apple user, because it makes so much difference because you can't see the pixels. And if you look at a 4K image on a 4K monitor, you get a proper impression of just how much detail you've got.
Yeah.
And your camera almost certainly captures more detail than you can even see full screen on your monitor. We're just drunk with power.
Yeah.
And I think this obsession with megapixels is kind of old-fashioned in a way. It goes back to the days when everybody imagined they'd be printing everything on their own, on like an A3 printer for exhibition or for putting on their wall. It's a nice idea. Nobody does it. Or one person in 100.
No.
That's not what we do, really, is it?
And I really remember there was a YouTube videos many years ago now, and made by a YouTube channel called The School of Photography, run by a guy called Mark. I actually met him in person many times. He's a brilliant chap, by the way. He's a good educator, but he did an experiment. He went to Southend with back then I think he was using the EM1 Mark II, which is 20 megapixel, but he also had a 50 megapixel Canon EOS 5DR, I think it was the 50 megapixel DSLR, and both had the same focal length, stop down f8, so they want to get the equivalent so you can't tell the depth of field, and shot several scenes, same tripod, same location, same spot, so you got the identical image basically. And they took those files to a professional printer, print these images out on the same size, A3 print, and After that, they shuffle them together. Obviously, they have the marking on the back of it, and ask anybody that he came across to ask their opinion. Can you tell the difference between these images? Whether you know which one has a high resolution sensor, none of them could tell. So unless you are going over a much, much larger print, and that's when you're starting to see the detail difference, when you have a print or a medium that doesn't resolve as much details, high megapixel doesn't seem to play the part. And that's with a simple experiment, simple logic.
I think that, however, that's not how it's perceived. And I think, but this is the problem, isn't it? That most people make buying decisions based on other people's opinions. They tend not to be based on practical reality, more based on what most people on the internet say most often.
Yeah,
and the kind of people who talk about camera technology on the internet, they're not always highly educated in photography.
Yeah.
But they are very proficient self-promoting marketeers. So they know how to write a headline and stir up some
viral thumbnails or clickbait titles, like today's topic, right?
If only I had that knack, I wouldn't be doing this job.
But it is true. It is true.
Yeah.
Even we had a discussion some time ago talk about high megapixel cameras. In theory, it sounds cool when you have that sort of high resolution sensor that you can play with, but then if your intention is to look into the details or to crop the image from this high resolution image, you do need a very, very high-end and high resolving lens to be able to make use of it. If you've got a relatively soft lens, even though you may have a lot of megapixels, when you do crop down into the image, you probably will see a very, very soft blob somewhere and you don't see the details.
I've used a lot of very average lenses on very high resolution cameras, and it's not a happy combination at all. I'd rather have a good lens on a modest resolution than an average lens on high resolution.
Well, you said it yourself. You were unhappy with the Fujifilm X-T5 40 megapixel sensor because some of the lenses just weren't up for it.
No, they weren't. It got out of step. There will be people who say, and it's a good point, the same lens on a 40 megapixel sensor will resolve more detail than on a 26 megapixel sensor, possibly. But your expectation as the user is that one shouldn't be so much better than the other. Because if you have a high resolution sensor and the lens is average, it really makes the performance of the lens obvious to a point where it becomes a bit painful or disturbing. It's not like the thing's right of balance. It's like having a car where the tires are too small, or you're driving a truck with a tiny engine. It's an imbalance that just makes you uncomfortable.
And we haven't even brought up another point is also that shooting a slightly lower megapixel sensor is also a little bit more forgiving when it comes to camera shakes as well.
Well, it is. I think you're probably getting down to, if you start looking at that kind of stuff, you're starting to a bit of pixel peeping. But it was something that became apparent to a lot of photographers when we moved from 12 to 15 to 18 to 24 megapixels. Suddenly people realize, oh, hang on, I need to increase my shutter speeds. I've got more camera shake than I thought, or a bit more shutter shock than I thought. But even though probably all of us here can understand this is a much more nuanced argument than just more megapixels is better, the bulk of camera sales and development is driven by people with very simple perceptions. And the main perception is a bigger number is better than the smaller one.
Yes. Well, the thing
bigger
is,
sensor is better than the smaller one.
It's always going to be how things were marketed, and this is not just about one-off marketing. It's about an education over time. When you see the big boys were talking about high resolutions, all they ever do in the marketing material is showing a punch-in shots of how sharp the eyelashes are and things. So people have to perceive ideas about high-resolution sensors. That means a lot of details, a lot of sharpness coming out from them.
Whereas a couple of things going on there. I think everyone who markets camera gear, pulls the wool over our eyes by using spectacular photography to do it, with the implication being that the quality of the camera has led to the quality of the photographs, which is, it's nonsense. The other thing is that as an aside, I've been looking at Nick Sharpener in a Nick collection, which I've always somewhat dismissed, until I figured out the secret was that you resize your photo before you sharpen it. But my point with this is that if you follow that process, let's say I'm doing a picture on my website, it needs to be 25, 60 pixels wide. From a, say, 20 or a 24 megapixel image. If that 20 or 24 megapixel image is slightly soft or a little bit noisy, by the time it's gone down to 25, 60, all of that is gone. It looks as crisp as anything. And then if you sharpen it specifically for screen use, it looks amazing. Absolutely amazing. So sometimes we're criticizing the quality of images at the pixel level that we're never going to need. But then this is another argument you can't win, because people will always say, well, look, 24 megapixels, that's got to be better than 20, right? And you can't argue with that. It's a number, and it is a bigger number.
Because they're easy to understand, right? You know, just a bigger number, better.
This is what I think the Micro Four Thirds format is up against. It's up against the market or an audience that only understands numbers or only trusts numbers. But
bring it back to that point that we were talking about, where was Olympus or Panasonic were ahead of the game, or thinking too far ahead when the market wasn't ready. And I mean, I think to a certain extent it did exist. And for instance, Olympus had the Air 01. Remember that camera that's detachable, trying to use the smartphone as the interface. And I think if you bring that kind of camera today with today's technologies and more reliable wireless connections technologies, it may work. But back then, you know, you are talking very early days of Wi-Fi, very early days of Bluetooth. The bandwidth wasn't there. The connection was slow, very erratic. You know, it can drop out, and also at the time, you know, they only rely on contrast detect, which wasn't fast at first. But so the user experience, it was lagging to focus. It was lagging between the interface to the lens. It just wasn't right. But now, could be a different story.
It could be. I mean, I don't like Wi-Fi connected apps because I've used so many, been so frustrated and disappointed. I'm permanently poisoned against Wi-Fi connections. Even if tomorrow they're magically transformed, I probably won't be ready to believe it. But there's another perception going around that contrast AF was slow, and phase detect is fast.
That's bollocks.
An older OM system.
Excuse me.
Older OM system cameras had phase detect. So like the Pen EP series cameras had phase detect AF. So people who'd never used one, what I call experience-free commentators, said, as contrast AF, it's going to be slow. The contrast AF on those cameras, and in fact on all the MFT cameras I've used, is generally rather snappier than DSLR autofocus and many mirrorless cameras, many full-frame mirrorless cameras. I don't know why that should be. Maybe the lens travel is shorter, the focus travel is shorter. Maybe the smaller sensor means faster readouts. I don't know what it is, but my feeling is that the contrast AF on these older cameras was at least the equal of anything we use today. You wouldn't use it for subject recognition and tracking. But for single shot autofocus, fine.
I would be honest and totally agree with you. And in fact, I would say that the Panasonic DFD would probably the fastest AF I've ever seen. Single
Well,
point
I-
AF, single point AF.
I had a Lumix G9,
Yeah.
which wasn't great for burst shooting with its contrast AF with its TFT, but for single shot autofocus, the speed was just spectacular,
Yes.
spectacular. And I've used a lot of cameras, so in principle, contrast AF is not slow, but the implementation might be slow.
Yeah.
But again, MFT is fighting against this perception
Yeah.
around technologies, and there are enough people talking loudly enough on the internet about
Yeah.
why phase detect is what you have to have, and contrast AF went out with the dinosaurs and is
Yeah.
awful. It's just
Yeah.
completely wrong. It's
Yeah.
annoying.
It is annoying, and it's very hard to change, unfortunately, and it's getting
Yeah, it is,
increasingly harder as well, because what's happening around, in terms of other camera manufacturers' advancements. It's just going to be an uphill battle. But on this point, let's move on to the next discussion, as we are talking about uphill battle. And in your eyes, or I'm asking also everybody who's listening as well, how would you tackle this problem, or how can you see Michael 4 at this point in 2025 or in the next couple of years to change people's perception, to change how people view the platform?
I think it would require a complete marketing shift, which would be quite brave. I feel that OM System has done very well to extract a decent margin and a steady pace of technological development from quite a small audience and user base. I think it's done that quite well, but it's going for the known and the predictable and the safe.
Yeah.
Can anyone remember going back a few years, and I don't want to start up another controversy, when you had these two actors doing ads? So one was the Apple guy and one was the PC guy.
Yeah, I remember that.
It should do that. So I'd do an ad campaign where you've got one guy coming along with the 8 to 25. Anyone who hasn't used it will have to take our word for this.
Yeah.
And say, I've got this 8 to 25 F4. You got one of those, right? And they'll say, no, but I've got this 16 to 35. And it's like, I can't show it both hands. One of my headphones together for Pete's sake. Hang on. They'll come along, I've got this 16 to 35.
Yeah.
And it's like four times the size. I would do a campaign like that. I'd leave the cameras for now and just show people the lenses. And
Well, actually,
well, you could do it with the 17-1.8, couldn't you? You could say, I've got this 17-1.8. It's effectively a 35 1.8.
yeah.
And the other guy would say, I got one, and it's that big. It's that big,
Well,
and it's not that big. How much did yours cost? Oh, mine was $800.
It's funny actually, because I made the video just like that. It's a parody. So like I actually
Did you?
I play two roles. Yes, I play two roles on the same screen. So I split the screen as two of me talking to each other. One is using Michael 4, one using full frame. I actually did that video. It was quite a funny video actually, and I made that probably about 6-7 years ago now. And I should actually relink the image that video down in the description later. If those who haven't seen it, you might have a laugh at it, But bear in mind that video is about 6-7 years ago. So some of the stuff that I talked back then may not be relevant today, but follow the same line.
We'll do it again. You could do it with the 12 to 100, couldn't you?
Yeah.
You get two guys turning out for a shoe. I've got this 12 to 100. It has 24 to 200 F4. You got one of those? Oh, yeah. And my style of photography doesn't require that. Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It was a fun video. I remember when I was making, I kept laughing myself.
You shouldn't laugh at your own jokes. That's bad form.
I know. No, I laughed on the side and I didn't record it. So I was two characters. So I play myself, Jimmy, using Michael 4, and the other guy who's in full frame was called Kimmy. So
Kimmy, nice. I see what you did there. I think if OM System was a different kind of company,
Yeah.
and would do that kind of stuff, I think that would be the way to do it. The whole bunch of lenses you could do videos for that. 300 f4.
Yeah.
How much will you pay for a full frame 600 f4?
I think you made a good point there, because when Apple made those commercials, it was at a time when Apple trying to change the perception of the company or the Mac OS, because PC was dominant. They have 98% of the market, and they needed something to re-educate people. Why should we choose Apple instead of PCs? And so they make a bunch of those videos just for that.
And they just chose this easygoing kind of persona.
Yeah.
Which didn't get into all the details and numbers. So look, this is what it is. It's what it does. Cool.
Yeah.
You know.
I know,
but I can't see them doing that. We should do that, Jimmy.
I should do that. I should do that. Maybe I can get some budget from them.
Are a stronger sell than the cameras. Nothing wrong with the cameras, but they're fighting a battle they can't win. With lenses, they're fighting a battle they can win.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So that's one point. And what do you think of OM Systems' latest OM3? I'm not talking about camera performance or camera review, but in terms of product launch, in terms of the product development, I personally think the OM3 is a good move. OM3 is at least OM System is finally responding to what the markets want in general. Something retro, something good looking, and then I don't know whether they're playing in the back of what Fuji has done, because OM Olympus back then was kind of like more almost the pioneer of retro styling cameras to start with, and somehow, like you said earlier, and it kind of lost its way in starting to go, becoming more, developing more and more these SLR bodies, which is kind of like less so of the retro styling stuff, which what everybody wanted.
Well, I think Fujifilm is in the process of repeating the same mistake, because they're chasing a mainstream mass market semi-professional audience with cameras that have a smaller sensor.
How so? They still have the X100, the XT.
Yeah, APS-C.
They're all pretty well. What about the new 100 RF, which is the retro styling medium format compact camera?
Okay, I'm going to exaggerate here. The X106, by the time you can buy one, it'll be out of date. The GF100R, is that the one?
The new one, the RF.
RF, if you can afford it, good luck to you. But the GFX50R, if anyone remembers that, I think was a better overall camera. What's the other one you mentioned? The XT5, that's retro, but that's all that's left. That's all that's left really in the XT50. What happened to the X Pro? What happened to the XE series? They if they were here now, I think they would be selling like hotcakes, and I think in fact on MPB they probably are. So I think Fujifilm is. So I think if you look at something like the XH2 and the XH2S, these are APS-C cameras that are going up against full frame rivals.
Yeah,
and I think that is another battle that's hard to win. I think Fujifilm's strength was its classy build, retro styling. It is designed around charm and desirability, not numbers and data. And I think that, so I think Fujifilm could be repeating what I consider the same mistake that Olympus made.
But yeah,
trying to win a battle they can't win.
They may have that problem, but at the same time, they still have the saving grace of their Instax camera, which is basically what brought in the majority of the profit.
That makes all the money.
So they somehow got that to fall back on. But when it comes to Michael Four Third, obviously OM System made the OM3 now seems to be heading, to me at least, heading the right direction when it comes to finally addressing what everybody wanted Michael Four Third to be. You know, like good looking, reliable, rugged, beautifully built, and small lenses, which they released two lenses at the same time as OM3 came out. And so if OM system can repeat that and continue the developments along this line, bring back some of the iconic models like the Pen series and things like that, that would be amazing. And I think that would hopefully, got some attentions back into the system, and people will start buying into the brand as well. But that's OM system. What about Panasonic? We talked a little bit about, they might have given up the G series altogether. So,
well,
it's hard to tell.
I don't know. I mean, a couple of people in the comments have mentioned the GX series. I had a GX8 for a while, which I rather liked.
Yeah.
I tested the GX9, but I don't remember that too well. But I think this may have come up in previous chats. Yeah. This idea of having a viewfinder in the corner.
Yep.
You might think, well, that's not how it's done. It should be in the middle. I'm not so sure. I quite like having a viewfinder in the corner, because then you've only got the camera over this part of your face, and you haven't got your nose pressed up against the back of the camera. So I quite like that design. I did like the GX8. I thought it was a little big, but I liked it a lot. But, that's the last we'll see of those, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, they kind of killed off the GX, right? And then
yeah. But that itself is quite unique in a way, that there's not really anything like that in a full frame. You've got the Sony A7C series.
Yeah.
But I'm not very fond of those. And they are quite expensive. And they're not as small as they're made out to be, especially because you've got to put a full frame lens on it. How many full frame lenses are small? Not many. So I like the GX cameras, but I think they're gone, sadly.
And do you think that Panasonic will eventually move completely full frame? You think so?
I think they'll thin out the range. I think they'll keep. They still seem to be selling the GH6. I think they'll keep the GH7, but I think that'll be it. I'm surprised to see the G9 Mark II staying at the same price.
Right.
I'm quite surprised that's not been discounted. I don't know how many of those have been sold. But in a funny kind of way, that's another camera that's not received the credit it deserved. I mean, if you're a 50-50 hybrid shooter, you would probably say, Jimmy, I don't know whether you'd agree, the GH7
there you go.
is a little better. But the G9 II is better at video than most cameras that claim to be proper hybrids. It's just that nobody's really picked up on it or cares to talk about it.
Absolutely. Well, between the G9 Mark II and the GX7, I personally prefer the GX7 because if when it comes to still photography, I would use the OM system cameras, and when it comes to video, I'll use the GX7. So the G9 Mark II, the G9 Mark II always, to me, is kind of like a strange camera to me, and because if I want to shoot video, I want to get one that can shoot proper videos. And if I want to do stills, I want something that is more capable of doing stills. I know many may argue that G9 Mark II is also very capable in stills, which is true. But I just don't think the G9 Mark II ergonomic is as good as Olympus. So when it comes to shooting, it's still a bit too square to me. I think.
I think I don't want to disrespect a camera you bought for yourself, Jimmy, but I do think this is an indication of Panasonic saving a bit of money by basically taking their Lumix
the S5 body,
and just the point for me was that the G9 Mark I was a much better physical design than the G9 Mark II, which is a bit frustrating. I think G9 Mark II is street's ahead for the sensor and for the autofocus and the video, but not as a physical tool. The G9 I think was better.
the gut of the G9 Mark II is amazing. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And the reason I said I prefer the GX7, even if I have to use a camera as a hybrid option, I will still prefer the GX7. I know it's bigger, it's thicker,
Yeah.
but it holds better. You know, the grip was feeling a lot better. And it just somehow, you know, this is only personal to me. The G9 Mark II doesn't quite fit my hand properly, and I just can't.
It's very square.
It's just very square. It digs into my hand a little bit too much, and I just don't like that. And on the other hand, the GX7 actually feels way, way better compared to G9 Mark II.
Yeah, I always felt the GH cameras felt so nice. You would use them for everything, even stills. Because actually, what you need for stills photography, it's not terribly demanding. You just needed to be able to do it. But so I don't know what's going to happen with the G9 Mark II, but I've got a feeling Panasonic will carry on selling some of its older things. Still selling the G7, for heaven's sake. They'll still carry on selling a few select back catalogue items. But I think it'll gradually come down to the GH6 and GH7. Then the GH6 will go, and the GH7 eventually they'll fade away too. And it's disappointing because I think the full frame alternatives they have some advantages in that you might be able to. There are plenty of good L mount lenses out there, and you know you've got things like LUTs in the S9, and your autofocus is probably quite good, but they haven't got the same processing power as the GH7. And there's no obvious indication they ever will.
Yeah. So that's going to be a very interesting thing to observe over the next few years to see exactly where Panasonic is going to do. Whether they will just basically give up on Micro Four Third and focus on the L mount cameras, or they might continue to be half and half. We just don't know yet because the S series cameras are still an uphill battle compared to other players at the moment.
Well, the thing is, there's no upgrade path either. There's no way to put MFT Lumix G lenses on the Lumix S, and you wouldn't put Lumix S lenses on the Lumix G camera. There's no crossover like Nikon and Canon and Sony have. There's no crossover in the formats. No. But I would say if anyone is giving up trying to find a Pen F used at a sensible price, do consider a GX8 or a GX9, because they don't have the same kind of retro style and class, but they're decent cameras that handle well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I like the GX8. I mean, I used one before. I don't own one, but I just think it's a very nice thing, a nice camera to hold. It's got nice grip. Yeah, it's got a side EVF. Yeah, so it's a decent camera.
Yeah. It is. I'd certainly recommend. They don't cost very much either because they're not in vogue. They're surprisingly big.
It is quite big.
Don't get a GX8 thinking you're going to get something like an Olympus pen. It's a bit bigger than that, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. So that basically concludes today's little points. Obviously, now it's come to the Q&A, maybe responding to some of your comments in this section there. But just a final cap on today's discussions. I know it's still a little bit open-ended. We don't know what's going to happen with Micro Four Third. I'm still a big believer and supporter to the format and the platform. I like the small lenses, like what Rod has said earlier, and I think this is still pretty much what Micro Four Third stands for, what Micro Four Third's strength is, and being a very small, well-made, beautiful, and capable travel system. I think this is really the strength, and I really do hope that both, either OM System or Panasonic will continue to develop the platform and to bring us more updates in the future. But at the moment, I don't see any other companies that outside of Panasonic or OM System is going to make any sort of effort into making any sort of Micro Four Third equipments now. Unfortunately, that's the fact that I've been observing, because I remember when I was doing this channel, doing a lot of reviews 4 to 5 years ago, I got a ton of Chinese lenses coming through to my door, the all Michael Four Thirds lenses, and I don't receive one these days, and all of them are full frame or APS-C lenses, and similarly, like 4 or 5 years ago, we heard about so many companies trying to make Micro Four Thirds cameras. Even China was trying to make one kind of like smartphone based Micro Four Thirds camera. Sharp was was still in prototype stage, doing their first 8K video camera in Micro Four Thirds format. Blackmagic was another big Micro Four Thirds player back then. We talk about filmmaking. They are now focusing on other mounts now, L mounts or EF mounts or mirrorless mounts now. So Micro Four Thirds seems to be taking a back seat now in the photography and video market.
Yeah, and I just think you can't help blame the marketing for some of that. How many well-heeled bird photographers can there be? You can't design a camera system just for them.
Yeah.
I think a bit more marketing around the OM3 wouldn't hurt, and its outdoor capabilities, its weatherproofing, its computational imaging, stabilization, and its size. Those are all key factors. But I think most of these Japanese companies are quite polite in their marketing, and they tend not to stoop to any overly aggressive self-promotion. They tend to market their products as if others don't exist, but they stay away from direct naming and comparisons. So it makes it harder, I think, for them to make any inroads. But I think possibly some trendier marketing wouldn't hurt.
No. Well, at the end of the day, the marketing materials or any sort of advertisements are the communication channels between the manufacturers and the consumers. And like whatever they put up is what people see and feel. So I guess in some way, what you was talking about, the birds and outdoor and things like that, it was good for a time, and it certainly highlights certain strength of Michael Four Thirds hats, in terms of the overall system size and weight. But then after a couple of years, that market that you built, the customer base that you built, is saturated, and you can't go further.
I think I think when we were at the photography show, we both commented that the OM system stand was crowded with people looking at the OM1 and the bigger lenses. Yeah. And we both said, so there's still a lot of interest there. But then the other way of looking at it is that maybe everyone in the country who might buy one was there. And there aren't any more, so we don't know how big the audience is.
So, I don't disagree focusing is a good thing, but at the same time, when it's too focused in one or two areas, then it could potentially become a problem in long term.
There's no crossover in the audience between the OM3 and the OM1 birding market, is there? Because I think the perception of the birding market would be fairly affluent pensioners, basically, who are interested in lesser spotted hedge warblers and that kind of thing. And a younger audience that might buy an OM3 would not want to associate with that. Yeah. So it's very different audience, and I think that has to be addressed properly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm really hoping that the OM3 will bring in some new blood into the system, not only for OM system, but overall for the platform, because I think one thing we just talked about earlier, people need to get past the marketing, get past the perceptions of what Michael Four Thirds is. Yeah. They need to try the system and see exactly what they are and how it feels in the hand. So hopefully OM3 will give that gateway and give that opportunity for people who haven't tried the system before finally realize, that the strength is. And even OM system themselves has talked to me in the last couple of years. They're no longer looking for people to switch. They're actually encouraging people to keep the existing format, if they're full frame user, APS-C or medium format users, to add the Micro Four Thirds as a supplementary system. So
Oh,
they're
I
not
see.
looking at
So
switches.
an additional
Yes.
system, yeah.
Additional system,
Yeah.
which is a very common thing these days, to be quite honest. I mean, like if you talk about many
Well,
photographers, they easily have two different brands or two different platforms.
well, this is the thing. You could have, say, a Sony system or a Canon system for your big jobs,
Yeah,
but if you want to go on a day out, take a little EP7 with a pancake
yep,
lens.
yep,
You don't have to have only one system and only one camera. So that's an interesting proposition. But
yep.
is it just me, or do you feel that OM system marketing is distinctly middle aged? Is that fair? Is that fair?
I, well, first of all, I think that that's only how
I
people
mean, I can
perceive.
talk.
Yeah,
I can talk.
I think this is just how people have
This
perceived
is
the brand.
this
Because
is
you
the
read
danger
this,
for the company.
it is. But then if you look at their marketing videos and the marketing images, they always feature young people in the last couple of years. They have young
Okay,
outdoor
okay, yeah.
girls and guys, whatever, doing their thing. They're not
Fair enough.
particularly
Fair enough.
middle age.
Yeah.
Yet,
No.
people who buy into the system, like you said, are very affluent pensioners.
Yeah,
And-
generally people who've got a bad back and
Yes.
have got lots of spare time.
And well, pretty much. But that's the thing, though. I think it's to do with not so much about the image, but also about the genre of photography that they are focusing on. Like outdoor photography, birding, and things. These are time-consuming photography. You got to
Yes,
be
yeah,
traveling to a
yeah.
location. You need to spend a long time waiting for the opportunity to happen to take a shot. This is not travel photography where it can happen anytime, any day, anywhere.
It's a completely different thing. Yeah.
So to some extent, you're thinking about like why is only middle-aged people or pensioners doing it? Because they're retired. They have the time to do things, whether they're rich or not. That's another thing. But they do have that time.
Yes. Yeah. They do. They do.
Young people working 9 to 5, they don't go out unless they're on holiday, and that's a very different thing altogether. So I think it's the genre of photography that really created the image. It created the crowd, not so much about they really wanted to attract those people. I think it's just the way it is.
I think then the OM3 audience, the potential audience, is so utterly different
Yes.
to the OM1 audience. You can't just lump them together and hope one rubs off on the other. Because the OM3 user is going to be shoving through a crowded train on a metro.
Yes.
And trying to grab street shots in an instant, and getting caught in a rainstorm and having kind of water cascading off onto their table out in an outdoor cafe. It's like not run and gun video, it's like run and gun stills photography. Completely different style of photography. And I think the OM3 is probably excellent at this, but people need to be shown.
Well, I mean, I think that's what they're trying to do now, and I think I think the popularity of the OM3, at least from the initial reviews and some of the data, suggests that it is doing its job, and I think there are a lot of new people who are interested in the camera, and they are buying in for the first time and into the system. So it's interesting how this would develop over time, but I think for sure is that OM system need to continue to press on with this this direction, or at least focusing on this direction in addition to what they're doing already. So they need to expand. They need to keep their loyal customer base at the moment, but at the same time need to attract some new people into the system, and by, I don't know, launching other pen cameras or maybe other lenses to continue to have this kind of vibe going and continue to do the success of what OM3 is bringing so far.
Yeah, I think so. I think the key with the OM3 is let's not mince words. It's how it looks.
Yeah.
Because in the new influencer market, how you look and how your camera looks is as important as the things you film and photograph.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to look like a nerd. and if their camera's got a bit of style and panache,
Yeah.
it rubs off on. So I think the OM3 will do well there.
Yeah.
Jimmy,
So
can you answer one thing for me from Gerard? His comment about so the thing that worries me about that is.
okay. Can you guys still hear? No. Right, I have no idea what happened there. Oh, I have lost Rod.